welcome back to the Story Shack with me, Kath, and Sloppy the Rabbit. And today we have a story from India, and this story is called The Magic Bed. One very hot day, a young Indian prince had been hunting all morning in the jungle, and by noon he'd lost sight of all his attendants. So he sat down under a tree to rest and to eat some of the cakes that his mother had made him. Well, when he broke into the first cake, he found an ant inside. Oh, and in the second, he found 2 ants, and in the third, 3 ants, and so on. So by the 6th cake he opened, there were 6 ants and the ant king himself. "Oh, I think these cakes belong to you more than they do to me," said the prince to the ant king. "Take them all, because I'm going to go for a sleep now." After a while, the ant king crawled up to the prince's ear as he lay there dreaming, and he said, "We are much obliged for the cakes, and we've eaten them all up. What can we do for you in return?" "I have everything I need," replied the prince in his sleep. "I can't spend all the money I have. I have more jewels than I can wear, and I have more servants than I can count, and I'm tired of them all." "You would never be tired of the Princess Laloon," replied the Ant King. "You should seek her, for she is as lovely as the morning." And when the young prince awoke, the ants were all gone, but he remembered what the Ant King had said about the Princess Laloon. "I must find out where this princess lives," he said to himself. So he rode on through the jungle until sundown. And there beside a pool there was a tiger, and he was standing there roaring very loudly. "Are you hungry?" asked the prince. "What's the matter?" "I'm not hungry. I have a thorn in my foot which hurts me very much," replied the tiger. "Rah!" So the prince jumped off his horse and he looked at the tiger's foot. He carefully pulled out the thorn, and tearing a piece of cloth from his turban, he bound some healing leaves gently over the wound. And just as he was ready to mount his horse again, a tigress came crashing through the jungle. "How nice!" she cried. "Here is a man and we can eat him." No, said her husband. "He's been very good to me. He's taken a thorn out of my foot, and I'm really grateful to him. If he wants our help at any time, we must give it to him." "We'd be much better off eating him," grumbled the tigress, but her husband growled so much in reply that she bounded off into the deep jungle. So the prince asked the tiger if he could tell him the shortest way to Princess Laloon's country, and the tiger told him it was across 3 ranges of hills and 7 jungles. "However," said the tiger, "there is a fakir in the next village to this, and this holy man has a magic bed which will carry you anywhere you wish to go. And besides this, he has a bag which will give you whatever you ask it for, and a stone bowl which will fill itself with water as often as you ask it to. If you can get these things, you will certainly find the Princess Laloon." The prince was delighted at this, and he set out to find the fakir. After some time he saw him sitting under a tree on the edge of the jungle. His bed was on one side of him, and his bag and his bowl were on the other side. The fakir sat still for a very long time when he heard what the prince wanted, and then he asked, "Why do you seek the Princess Laloon?" "Well, because I want to marry her," replied the prince very earnestly. "Look into my eyes while I hold your hands," said the fakir. And then, after seeing that the prince was someone who could be trusted, the fakir agreed to lend him his precious things and to take care of his horse until the prince came back. "Now lie on the bed and wish yourself in the Princess Laloon's country," said the fakir. And taking the bag and the stone bowl in his hands, the prince stretched himself out on the bed. "Take me to Princess Laloon's country." And no sooner had he spoken, off he went over the 7 jungles, over the 3 ranges of hills, and in less than a minute he was set down within the borders of the kingdom where Princess Laloon lived. The name of the princess's father was Afzal, and he was the Raja of that country. So many princes had sought his daughter in marriage that he was tired of saying no to them. He tried giving them impossible tasks to do to get rid of them, but they just still kept coming. And at last, Raja Afzal had decided to just keep foreigners out of his kingdom altogether. So he issued a decree that no one was to give a night's lodging to any stranger if they asked for it. So when the prince came to an old woman's cottage and asked if he might spend the night there, she told him that the Raja would never allow that. "Well, can I bring my bed into your garden and sleep there?" he asked, "and perhaps have supper with you?" "I've got nothing but rice for supper," said the old woman, shaking her head. But the prince pleaded so hard to let him come in that she finally agreed. He put his bag onto the table and spoke to it. "Bag, I want something to eat." And all at once the bag opened, and there was a fine supper for 2 people. So the old woman and the prince feasted on a delicious meal that was served on golden plates with golden spoons. When they'd finished eating, the old woman said that she had to go to the well to get some water to wash up with. "You don't have to do that," said the prince, and he tapped on his bowl. "Bowl," he cried, "I want water." And at once the bowl filled with water, and the old woman washed all the golden plates and all the golden spoons. "If you let me stay with you for a while," said the prince, "you may keep all of those plates and spoons for yourself. Have you counted how many there are?" And then he ordered the bowl to fill with water again, and he was washing his hands in it. "Oh, my bowl gives me all the water I want," he said. "And this bag gives me everything else that I asked for," he explained. "But they belong to a holy fakir, and he might be very angry if you turned his things out of the house tonight." The old woman sat very quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Oh, the anger of a Raja is something to be dreaded, but that of a fakir might be far worse. Oh dear, I don't know what to do. What shall I do?" But in the end, the old woman picked up the 12 golden plates and the 12 golden spoons, and she tucked them carefully away under her bed. "Oh, all right, you can stay," she said, "but be careful that the Raja's soldiers don't catch you." By this time it was night, and the prince and the old woman sat in darkness, for there was no lamp in the house. "Oh, the Raja doesn't allow lamps to be used," she said. "His daughter, the Princess Laloon, she sits on the roof of the palace at night, shines so that she lights up the whole country." And just then, a beautiful silver radiance filled the room, and when the prince stepped outside, he saw that the princess was sitting on the roof of her palace. Her sari was of silver gauze, and her dark hair floated almost to her feet. She wore a band of diamonds and pearls across her head, and the light that came from her was as beautiful as that of the sun and the moon and all the stars together. "The Ant Raja was right," said the prince. "Her beauty turns darkness into light and night into day. I should never be weary of the Princess Laloon." At midnight, the princess came down from her roof and went to her room. The prince sat down on his bed with the bag in his hand. "Bed," he said, "take me to the princess's palace." So the bed took him to where she lay fast asleep. "Bag," he whispered, "I want a lovely shawl, all embroidered in red and blue and gold." And the bag gave it to him, and he spread it gently over the princess. And then the bed carried him back to the old woman's cottage. The bag gave the prince and the old woman breakfast and dinner and supper the next day. And when night came, the princess again sat on the roof, and this time her sari was of white silk covered with diamond butterflies, and she shone more gloriously than ever. At midnight, the princess went to her room again, and then the prince told his bed to take him back to the palace. "Bag," he whispered, "I need a really beautiful ring." And in an instant, the bag gave him an absolutely stunning ring, all set with rubies, which he slipped onto the princess's hand as she lay asleep, and then he sat patiently until she woke, and he told her who he was. When the princess saw what a noble, handsome young man he was, and heard that he was the son of a great Rajah, and that he was the one who had brought her that magnificent shawl the night before, she fell in love with him and said she would tell her father and mother that she wanted him for her husband. Filled with joy, the prince went back to the old woman's cottage to wait. Raja Afzal, Princess Laloon's father, sent for the prince the next day and told him he might marry the princess because she wished it. "But first," said he, "you must complete one task for me. Here are 80 pounds of mustard seed. You must crush the oil out of them in one day." "It's impossible," said the prince as he went away from the palace. "How can I do it?" And when the old woman heard of it, she said, "Well, yes, it is quite impossible. Only an army of ants could do that." Suddenly, the prince thought of the ant Rajah. Of course! And at that very minute that he thought of him, the ant Rajah and all his ants crept under the door and into the room. "Oh, if I don't crush all the oil out of this mustard seed before tomorrow morning, I cannot marry the Princess Laloon," the prince cried desperately, showing the bag of seeds to the ant Rajah. "We will attend to it for you," replied the ant Rajah. "Just you go to sleep and leave it to us." And when the prince awoke in the morning, there was not a single drop of oil left in the mustard seeds, and with a joyful heart he took it to the king. "That's very good indeed," said Raja Afzal. "But I have something else for you to do. One day when I was out in the hills, I caught 2 demons, and I have them here in the palace, shut up in a cage, but I want them killed because one day they might break out and harm my people. So you may marry Princess Laloon if you can kill the demons." "Oh, how can I fight 2 demons?" the prince asked the old woman when he was back in her cottage. "Well, only a couple of tigers could do that, maybe," replied the old woman. And as soon as she said that, the prince heard a great roar, and he knew his tigers were scratching at the cottage door. "Take us to the king," roared the tiger. "Ugh," said the tiger's wife. So off they went to the palace, and the whole court came out to watch as the tigers did indeed kill the 2 demons. Mrs. Tiger was actually really happy to have someone to eat at last. But when the prince said, "Now will you give me your daughter?" Raja Afzal replied, "There is just one more thing. If you can beat my kettle drum, you shall marry the Princess Laloon." "Where is the drum?" asked the prince. "Up there, in the sky," replied the Rajah. Well, the prince was beginning to think that Raja Afzal was never going to allow him to marry his daughter. "I don't know how I can get up into the sky," sighed the prince. "This is the hardest task of all." So he went to the cottage and said to the old woman, "My ants crushed all the oil, my tigers killed the demons, but who is left to get up into the sky and beat this kettle drum?" "Oh, you are rather silly," said the old woman. "If your bed carried you across 7 jungles and 3 ranges of hills, don't you think it can take you up into the sky?" "Oh, I can't believe I didn't think of that," cried the prince, and he sat down upon the magic bed, and up into the sky it flew, where he beat the kettle drum so loudly with the handle of his hunting knife that the Rajah and everyone else in the kingdom could hear him. "The wedding will take place as soon as you like," said the Rajah when the prince came back down to earth. And so the prince arranged for the bed and the bowl and the bag to be delivered safely back to the fakir. And then invitations to the wedding were sent to all the kings and queens of the neighbouring countries. And after they were married, the prince took the Princess Laloon home to his own country, where they all lived happily ever after, even Mrs. Tiger. But when there's a full moon, if you look up into the sky, maybe you will see the Princess Laloon shining her light onto the whole world. See you next time.